England, 1847. The gaslight flickered against the damask wallpaper of the Prescott family drawing room, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the same nervous energy that consumed Lady Evangeline Prescott. She stood by the window, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the cool glass as rain pattered against it, nature's tears matching the ones she fought to contain. "It is decided, then?" Her voice was barely audible, a whisper that nevertheless carried the weight of her entire future. Behind her, Lord William Prescott cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the tension-filled room. "The papers were signed this morning, Evangeline. You are to be the Duchess of Somerset by month's end." Evangeline closed her eyes, willing herself not to shatter like the delicate porcelain figurines that adorned the mantelpiece. The Duke of Somerset, Edmund Radcliffe. Even his name sent shivers down her spine, not the pleasant kind that heroines experienced in the romantic novels she'd secretly devoured, but the kind that spoke of dread and foreboding. "Father, surely there must be another way." She turned, her emerald eyes pleading. "The rumors about the Duke are merely that—" "Rumors," interjected Lady Helena Prescott, Evangeline's mother, though her voice lacked conviction. She adjusted her already perfect posture on the settee, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her expensive gown. "The Duke's offer is most generous. The connection to Somerset will elevate our family's position immeasurably." "At what cost?" Evangeline dared to ask. Lord Prescott's expression hardened. He was not a cruel man, but ambition had always been his guiding star. "The Duke has requested your hand, specifically, Evangeline. He has never shown interest in any other young lady of society. Surely that should flatter you." "Flatter me? Father, they say he never leaves Somerset Hall except on the darkest of nights. They say servants disappear without explanation. They say—" "Enough!" Lady Prescott's fans snapped open with alarming force. "Such gossip is beneath you, Evangeline. The Duke is eccentric, perhaps, but his lineage is impeccable, and his fortune vast. Our family will want for nothing, including my happiness." The words escaped before Evangeline could contain them. A heavy silence fell. Lord Prescott's expression softened momentarily. "My dear, happiness in marriage is a luxury few can afford, even among our station. Security, respect, position, these are the foundations of a successful union." Evangeline's lady's maid, Clara Bennet, moved silently in the corner, pretending not to hear as she arranged fresh flowers. But Evangeline caught her sympathetic glance. "When am I to meet him?" Evangeline asked, resignation beginning to seep into her voice. "You will not." Lady Prescott's response was matter-of-fact. "The Duke has been most explicit in his requirements. The ceremony will take place at Somerset Hall, and you shall meet your husband at the altar." Horror washed over Evangeline. "That's barbaric. I am to marry a man I've never even laid eyes upon." "You have seen him," Lord Prescott corrected, "at Lady Harrington's ball 2 seasons ago. He observed you from across the room." The memory surfaced like a wraith, a tall, imposing figure in the shadows, his face half hidden yet somehow commanding the attention of the entire ballroom despite his obvious desire for anonymity. She had felt his gaze, heavy and assessing, but had attributed the sensation to youthful imagination. "That was him?" Evangeline whispered. "He never approached, never asked for an introduction." "The Duke does not adhere to conventional social niceties," Lord Prescott said dryly. "But he was evidently impressed enough to make inquiries about you specifically." A knock at the door interrupted them. The family butler, Simmons, entered with a silver tray bearing a small package wrapped in dark blue velvet. "A delivery for Miss Prescott, my lord, from Somerset Hall." All eyes followed the package as Simmons presented it to Evangeline. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the velvet to reveal a small wooden box of exquisite craftsmanship. When she opened it, a collective gasp filled the room. Inside lay a ring unlike any Evangeline had ever seen, not the expected diamond, but a deep blue sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds that glittered like captured stars. Beneath it was a folded piece of parchment bearing a seal of dark red wax impressed with the Somerset crest. "Read it," Lady Prescott urged, curiosity temporarily overcoming decorum. Evangeline broke the seal and unfolded the note. The handwriting was bold, angular, unmistakably masculine. "Lady Evangeline, I offer this sapphire as a symbol of our impending union. It has adorned the hand of every Duchess of Somerset since the reign of Elizabeth II. Tradition dictates that I should present it to you in person, but circumstances make this impossible at present. Know that while this arrangement may seem precipitous, it was not entered into lightly. I have observed you from afar and believe you possess qualities that Somerset has lacked for too long. I shall await you at the altar on the appointed day. Edmund Radcliffe, Duke of Somerset. No words of affection, no romantic platitudes, just cold, practical information delivered with aristocratic efficiency. Evangeline felt her future closing in around her like the walls of a beautifully appointed prison. How pragmatic, Lady Prescott commented, disappointed by the lack of sentiment. Lord Prescott nodded approvingly. The Duke is a man of business, not flowery words. This bodes well for the management of both our estates. Evangeline said nothing, but her eyes met Clara's across the room. In that silent exchange, her terror was acknowledged by perhaps the only person who truly cared for her happiness above all else. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of preparations. Seamstresses fluttered around Evangeline like butterflies, creating a trousseau fit for a duchess. Etiquette instructors drilled her on the proper behavior expected of someone of her imminent rank. Trunks were packed with her belongings, ready for the journey to Somerset Hall, a place that grew more forbidding in her imagination with each passing day. Throughout it all, Evangeline maintained a facade of calm acceptance, but inside her dread intensified. Each night she would stare at the sapphire ring, now on her finger, wondering about the man who had chosen her without so much as a proper conversation. 3 days before the wedding, as Clara arranged her hair for a final dinner with her family, Evangeline finally broke her silence on the matter. "What if I simply ran away?" she whispered, Clara's hands stilled in her mistress's copper-colored tresses. "And go where, my lady?" "Anywhere. My cousin in Bath, perhaps, or to the continent." Clara resumed her work, securing a pearl pin. "With what funds, if I may be so bold? And how long before you were found? The Duke has resources beyond imagining. You think he would pursue me? A man of his position, publicly abandoned at the altar, without question?" Evangeline's shoulders slumped. "Then I am truly trapped." Clara moved to face her mistress, a rare breach of servant protocol. "My lady, may I speak freely?" Evangeline nodded. "My mother served at Blackwood Manor when the previous Duke was alive. She said the current Duke was not always as fearsome as people claim." Evangeline's eyes widened. What happened to change him? That she would never say, only that there was a great tragedy when he was younger, something that transformed him. Clara hesitated. "Perhaps, my lady, beneath the rumors lies a man capable of kindness still. You truly believe that?" Clara adjusted a final strand of Evangeline's hair. "I believe that fear makes monsters of shadows, my lady, and sometimes the most frightening facades hide the deepest wounds." The evening before her departure for Somerset Hall, Evangeline found herself alone in the family library, seeking solace among the familiar books of her childhood. The door opened quietly and her father entered, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I thought I might find you here," Lord Prescott said, approaching slowly. Evangeline closed the volume in her lap. "I was just remembering happier times." Her father sighed heavily, taking the seat opposite her. "I know you believe I've sold you to a monster for social advancement, Evangeline. Haven't you?" The question held more sorrow than accusation. "The Duke's reputation is complicated, but not all rumors tell the full truth." Lord Prescott leaned forward. "Before I agreed to this match, I made inquiries of my own. His tenants speak of a fair landlord who never raises rents unreasonably. His business associates describe him as honorable, if intensely private. And his solicitor, with whom I negotiated the marriage settlement, insisted that the Duke had been most generous in his provisions for you." "Then why does society fear him so?" Evangeline asked. "People fear what they do not understand. And the Duke has made himself deliberately unknowable." Lord Prescott hesitated. "There was indeed a tragedy in his past, one that changed him profoundly. But that does not make him cruel." Evangeline studied her father's face, searching for reassurance. "You truly believe I will be safe with him?" "I would never send my daughter to a man I believed would harm her," Lord Prescott replied, unexpected emotion roughening his voice. "This match may not be the love match you dreamed of, but I believe it offers you security and, perhaps in time, contentment." It was the closest thing to an apology she would receive. Evangeline nodded, accepting what could not be changed. "I shall endeavour to be a dutiful duchess, then." Lord Prescott reached out awkwardly to pat her hand, a rare display of affection. "You have always exceeded expectations, my dear. I have no doubt you will do so again." The carriage journey to Somerset Hall 2 days later was interminable. Evangeline watched the landscape transform from the familiar countryside near her family home to increasingly wild, windswept moors. The sky darkened with approaching storm clouds, mirroring her growing apprehension. Clara, seated opposite her, offered silent support as the carriage finally turned onto a long, tree-lined drive. At its end rose Somerset Hall, a massive Gothic structure of dark stone and forbidding spires that seemed to pierce the steel-grey sky. "Give him a chance to be more than his reputation," Clara whispered, as the carriage wheels crunched on the gravel, coming to a halt before massive oak doors. A line of servants emerged, faces carefully neutral, led by an austere-looking woman in black. "Lady Evangeline," the woman greeted with a perfect curtsy. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Winters, housekeeper of Somerset Hall. Welcome to your new home." As Evangeline stepped from the carriage, a shadow moved in an upper window, tall, broad-shouldered, watching. Then it was gone, leaving her to wonder if her fearful imagination had conjured it. "His Grace awaits your arrival, Mrs." Winters continued, her expression giving nothing away. "The ceremony will take place in the family chapel tomorrow at noon." Evangeline summoned every ounce of courage as she followed Mrs. Winters into the cavernous entrance hall, where suits of armour stood sentinel and ancestral portraits stared down with judging eyes. Each step took her closer to her fate, to the mysterious Duke who had claimed her from afar. Tomorrow she would become the Duchess of Somerset. Tomorrow she would finally meet the man whose very name struck fear into the hearts of London's elite. Tomorrow everything would change. The morning of her wedding dawned grey and misty, as if the heavens themselves were reluctant to witness the union about to take place. Evangeline stood motionless as Mrs. Winters and 2 silent maids dressed her in the wedding gown that had arrived mysteriously in her chambers during the night, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that fit her perfectly, despite never having been measured for it. "His Grace has an eye for detail," Mrs. Winters commented, noting Evangeline's surprise at the fit. It was the closest thing to personal information about the Duke that anyone had offered since her arrival. "Has he selected everything for today?" Evangeline asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "The Duke oversees all matters at Somerset Hall," was the cryptic reply. As the veil was arranged over her face, a gossamer curtain between Evangeline and the world, she caught her reflection in the ornate mirror. She looked like a ghost bride, pale and ethereal, being prepared for a sacrifice rather than a celebration. "It is time," Mrs. Winters announced precisely at 11:30. The walk to the chapel felt interminable. Located in the east wing of the vast estate, the sacred space was accessible through a long corridor lined with tapestries depicting ancient battles and hunting scenes. Evangeline focused on her breathing, on placing one foot before the other, on anything but the man waiting at the end of her journey. The chapel doors opened with a groan that echoed Evangeline's internal anguish. The space beyond was illuminated by hundreds of candles, their golden light softening the severity of the stone walls and casting kaleidoscopic colors through the stained glass windows. White roses and lilies perfumed the air, their scent almost overwhelming in the enclosed space. A small gathering awaited, her parents looking both proud and apprehensive, a handful of Somerset staff positioned discreetly along the walls, an aging vicar with kind eyes that offered silent sympathy, and at the altar, his back to her, stood a figure that could only be the Duke. Edmund Radcliffe turned as the first notes of music announced her entrance. Through her veil, Evangeline could make out only his silhouette, tall, imposingly broad-shouldered, standing with military straightness. As she drew closer, details emerged. Raven black hair, features carved with aristocratic sharpness, and eyes, heavens, his eyes, a piercing blue that seemed to cut through her veil and into her very soul. He was handsome in a severe, uncompromising way that made her breath catch. Not the soft handsomeness of society dandies, but something harder, more primal. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, lending an asymmetry to an otherwise perfectly proportioned face. His expression revealed nothing as she took her place beside him. The ceremony passed in a blur. Evangeline heard herself speak the vows as if from a distance, felt the weight of a new ring joining the sapphire on her finger. Throughout it all, the Duke's voice remained steady, deep and utterly devoid of emotion, as he claimed her as his wife. When the vicar instructed him to lift her veil and kiss his bride, Evangeline's heart threatened to burst from her chest. This would be their first touch, their first true meeting of eyes without barriers. Edmund's hands rose with deliberate slowness, lifting the delicate fabric as if unveiling a priceless artwork. When their gazes finally met, unobstructed, Evangeline was startled by what flashed momentarily in those blue depths. Not cruelty or coldness, but something closer to uncertainty, quickly masked. The kiss was brief, formal, the barest brushing of lips that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through Evangeline's frozen limbs. Then it was over, and she was being led back down the aisle as the Duchess of Somerset, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a virtual stranger who was now her husband in the eyes of God and country. The wedding breakfast that followed was a stilted affair in the grand dining room. Edmund sat at the head of the table, Evangeline to his right, maintaining proper etiquette while speaking little. Lord and Lady Prescott filled the silence with nervous chatter about the weather, the journey, the beauty of Somerset Hall, anything to avoid acknowledging the palpable tension. "Your gardens appear quite extensive, Your Grace," Lady Prescott ventured at one point, desperate for conversation. "They are," Edmund replied without elaboration. Lord Prescott cleared his throat. "I understand the Somerset Library is one of the finest private collections in England." This, at least, elicited more than monosyllables. "It has been the work of generations. My grandfather was particularly dedicated to its expansion." Evangeline glanced at her husband, noting how his features softened slightly when speaking of his family. It was the first crack in his forbidding demeanor. "Do you enjoy reading, Your Grace?" she asked, finding her voice at last. Edmund's eyes met hers, surprise evident in them. Whether at the question itself or that she had dared to address him directly, she couldn't tell. "I do," he answered after a pause. "It is one of the few pleasures that never disappoints." Something in his tone made Evangeline wonder what or who had disappointed him in the past. The meal concluded with strained farewells as Lord and Lady Prescott prepared to depart, leaving their daughter to her new life. Lady Prescott embraced Evangeline with unusual emotion. "Write to us," she whispered. "Often." Lord Prescott shook the Duke's hand with forced joviality. "Take good care of her, Somerset." "She is my Duchess," Edmund replied with quiet intensity. "She will want for nothing." Again, Evangeline noted he spoke of material provisions, not affection or happiness. As her parents' carriage disappeared down the long drive, taking with it her last connection to her former life, Evangeline felt suddenly, terribly alone. She stood on the steps of Somerset Hall, now her home, beside a husband who remained as enigmatic as the day she had first heard his name. "You must be tired from the day's events," Edmund said formally, breaking a silence that had stretched between them like a chasm. "Mrs. Winters will show you to your chambers. I have matters requiring my attention in the study." Disappointment mingled with relief in Evangeline's breast. "Of course, Your Grace." "Edmund," he corrected, a flicker of something indefinable crossing his features. "You are my wife now. You should use my given name at least in private." "Edmund," she repeated softly, tasting the name on her tongue for the first time. He gave a curt nod, then hesitated. "The south wing is being renovated. It would be best if you did not venture there for the time being." With that cryptic warning, so reminiscent of the Gothic novels that had once entertained and now haunted Evangeline, he turned and strode away, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Her chambers were a suite of rooms in the west wing, decorated in shades of blue and cream that should have been soothing but felt impersonal. Everything was new, selected with obvious care and expense, yet lacking any trace of the woman who would inhabit them. "The Duke had these rooms refurbished entirely for your arrival," Mrs. Winters informed her, a hint of approval in her usually impassive voice. "The previous Duchess's chambers had not been used in many years." "The previous Duchess?" Evangeline inquired, seizing the opportunity to learn something, anything, about the family she had married into. "The Duke's mother passed when he was quite young," Mrs. Winters replied, her tone making it clear that further questions would not be welcomed. Left alone at last, Evangeline wandered through her new domain, a sitting room with views of the formal gardens, A dressing room filled with gowns she had never seen before. A bathing chamber with modern plumbing that would have delighted her under different circumstances. The bedroom was dominated by a massive four-poster bed draped in blue velvet. Evangeline approached it with trepidation, her mind filling with thoughts of the night to come. As Edmund's wife, she knew what would be expected of her. The very idea sent alternating waves of fear and an unexpected, confusing warmth through her body. Hours passed. Clara arrived with the remaining luggage, her familiar presence a comfort in the strange surroundings. She helped Evangeline change from her wedding gown into a nightdress of cream-colored silk, another item that had appeared mysteriously in her wardrobe, and brushed out her long copper hair until it shone in the candlelight. "Has there been any word?" Evangeline asked, both dreading and anticipating her husband's arrival. Clara shook her head. "The Duke is still in his study, my lady. I mean, Your Grace." More hours passed. Dinner was served on a tray in her sitting room, a solitary meal that Evangeline barely touched. Night fell completely, and still Edmund did not come. At nearly midnight, when Evangeline had resigned herself to spending her wedding night alone, a knock sounded at her door. Her heart leapt to her throat. "Enter," she called, her voice barely audible. The door opened to reveal Edmund, still fully dressed in his wedding attire, his cravat loosened only slightly. He stood on the threshold, not entering, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Forgive the lateness of the hour," he said formally. "I wish to ensure you were settled comfortably." "Yes, thank you," Evangeline replied, clutching her dressing gown tighter around herself. "The rooms are lovely." A heavy silence fell between them. Evangeline waited, her pulse racing, for him to approach, to claim his husbandly rights. Instead, Edmund remained by the door, his posture rigid. "Is there anything you require?" he asked. The question was so unexpected, so at odds with what she had been told to expect from this feared man, that Evangeline could only stare at him in confusion. Edmund's gaze moved over her, noting her defensive posture, the way she had positioned herself with the bed between them. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like pain. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Evangeline opened her mouth to deny it. A proper wife would surely deny such a thing, but found herself unable to lie. "Yes," she whispered, her honesty surprising them both. Edmund's face hardened momentarily, then settled into a carefully neutral expression. He nodded once as if her answer had confirmed something he already suspected. "I see." His voice was controlled, revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Then I will bid you good night, Evangeline." He turned to leave but paused with his hand on the doorknob. Without looking back at her, he added, "You need not fear that particular obligation of marriage. I will not come to you unless invited." Before Evangeline could process this extraordinary statement, much less respond to it, Edmund was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. Every rumor, every fearful expectation had led her to anticipate a very different sort of wedding night. The Duke of Somerset, the man whispered about in terrified tones throughout London society, had just granted her a choice in the most fundamental aspect of their marriage. Why? What manner of monster offered his frightened bride mercy? Days passed, and Evangeline began to establish a routine in her new home. Somerset Hall was vast enough that she rarely encountered Edmund except at dinner, which they took together in formal silence. He was unfailingly polite but distant, making no attempt to bridge the gulf between them. During her explorations of the estate, always careful to avoid the forbidden south wing, Evangeline discovered the library, a magnificent two-story room with shelves reaching to the ceiling, accessible by rolling ladders. Here, at least, she found comfort in the familiar embrace of books. It was in this sanctuary, a week after her wedding, that she encountered Edmund unexpectedly. He was seated in a leather chair by the fire, so absorbed in his reading that he did not immediately notice her entrance. Evangeline paused, struck by how different he appeared in this unguarded moment, his severe features softened by the firelight, his posture relaxed rather than rigidly formal. For an instant, she glimpsed the man he might have been under different circumstances. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before the familiar mask descended. "Forgive me. I did not hear you enter." "No, I should apologize for disturbing you," Evangeline replied, backing toward the door. "I'll return later. Please stay." The words seemed to surprise Edmund as much as they did her. He gestured to the shelves. "The library is yours to use as you wish. I was just leaving." He began to rise, but Evangeline found herself speaking without planning to. "What are you reading?" Edmund hesitated, then held up the volume, a collection of poetry by John Keats. "An indulgence," he admitted, something almost like embarrassment crossing his features. "Beauty is truth, truth beauty," Evangeline quoted softly, recognizing the poet. Edmund's eyes widened slightly. "You know Keats?" "My father's library was well stocked, if not as impressive as this one," she replied. "And I've always found solace in poetry." A moment of genuine connection passed between them, brief but undeniable. Then Edmund cleared his throat, rising from his chair. "I shall leave you to your reading, then." As he passed her, he paused. "Evangeline," he said, her name still sounding unfamiliar on his lips. "Somerset Hall is your home now. You need not hide away in your chambers. The house and grounds are yours to explore." His mouth tightened slightly. "Except for the south wing," she finished for him. "Yes, I remember." He nodded, studying her face as if searching for something. Whatever it was, he seemed not to find it, for he merely inclined his head in a formal bow before leaving her alone among the books. Evangeline moved to the chair he had vacated, still warm from his presence. On the small table beside it lay not only the Keats volume, but a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with what appeared to be estate accounts. Beside it was a list of tenants' names, with notes about repairs needed to their cottages and improvements to their farming equipment. This glimpse into Edmund's daily concerns revealed a side of him society's rumors had never mentioned, a landowner who appeared to take his responsibilities to his tenants seriously. It was a small revelation, but one that added complexity to the portrait she was beginning to form of her mysterious husband. As she settled into the chair with a book of her own, Evangeline found herself wondering what other surprises lay beneath the Duke's forbidding exterior, and despite herself, she felt a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even the faintest stirring of interest, in the man she had married. Sleep eluded her that night as she stared at the canopy above, wondering what secrets lurked in the shadows of Somerset Hall, and what lay behind the carefully guarded facade of the man she had married. The man who, when faced with her fear, had offered not domination but choice. The man who perhaps was not the monster she had been led to believe. Days stretched into weeks, and Evangeline gradually settled into a routine at Somerset Hall that was vastly different from what she had imagined. Edmund proved to be an absent husband, preoccupied with estate business that frequently took him from dawn until dusk. They shared meals occasionally, always conducted with formal politeness, but he never sought her company beyond these brief interactions. True to his word on their wedding night, Edmund made no advances. He treated Evangeline with distant respect, ensuring her comfort materially while maintaining an emotional chasm between them. Their conversations remained superficial, rarely straying beyond the day's events or the running of the household. Yet Evangeline found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, the way his brow furrowed when reading correspondence, how his hands moved with surprising gentleness when handling books from his precious library, the rare occasions when his guard slipped and a flash of vulnerability crossed his features. These glimpses of the man beneath the Duke's forbidding exterior only deepened her curiosity. Somerset Hall itself was a puzzle box of contradictions. Parts of the estate were maintained with obsessive perfection, the library, the music room, the formal gardens, while others seemed deliberately neglected, particularly the mysterious south wing that remained off-limits. The staff, too, presented an enigma. They performed their duties with exceptional efficiency, but maintained a wary distance from their new mistress, only Mrs. Winters occasionally unbent enough to offer glimpses into the household's workings, though she remained steadfastly loyal to Edmund, revealing nothing of substance about him or his past. It was during the exploration of her new domain that Evangeline made her first meaningful discovery about her husband. In a rarely used drawing room in the north wing, she found a portrait half hidden behind heavier draperies, a family grouping that immediately captured her attention. A younger Edmund, perhaps 16 or 17, stood beside a seated couple, his resemblance to the stern-faced man clearly marking him as their son. But it was the fourth figure in the painting that caused Evangeline's breath to catch. A young boy of about 10, with the same raven hair as Edmund but softer features, his smile carefree in a way she had never witnessed on her husband's face. That would be Master Frederick, the young master. The voice startled Evangeline. She turned to find Simmons, the elderly butler, standing in the doorway. "I didn't know Edmund had a brother," she said, turning back to study the painting. Simmons hesitated before answering. "Had, Your Grace. Master Frederick passed many years ago." "How?" The question escaped before Evangeline could consider its propriety. The butler's face closed like a book snapping shut. "It is not my place to speak of such matters, Your Grace. If you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to." He was gone before she could press further, leaving Evangeline with more questions than answers. A brother now deceased. This explained something of the shadows that seemed to haunt Somerset Hall, but raised new mysteries. That evening at dinner, she gathered her courage to broach the subject with Edmund. "I found a portrait today," she began carefully, watching his expression. "In the north drawing room." Edmund's hand stilled momentarily as he reached for his wine-glass. "Did you? You had a brother?" The temperature in the dining room seemed to drop several degrees. Edmund's face hardened into the impenetrable mask she had come to know well. "Frederick died 20 years ago," he said flatly. "The portrait should have been removed with the others." "Others?" Evangeline couldn't help asking. "I prefer not to be reminded of what cannot be changed." His tone brooked no further discussion. "If you'll excuse me, I have correspondence requiring my attention." He left his meal half finished, striding from the room with tension evident in every line of his body. That night, unable to sleep and frustrated by her husband's evasiveness, Evangeline made a decision. If Edmund would not willingly share his past, she would uncover it herself. Perhaps in understanding him, she might find a way to bridge the gulf between them, a gulf she increasingly wished to cross, though she scarcely acknowledged this desire even to herself. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following morning, Edmund announced over breakfast that he would be travelling to London on business for several days. "Is there anything you require from town?" he asked, with his usual formality. Evangeline shook her head. "I believe I have everything I need." Something flickered in Edmund's eyes. Disappointment? Before he nodded. "Mrs. Winters will oversee the household in my absence. Should you need anything, do not hesitate to ask her." After Edmund's departure, Evangeline wasted no time. She began with the library, methodically searching through family records, correspondence, anything that might illuminate the history of the Radcliffes. Her efforts yielded little until she discovered a locked drawer in Edmund's desk. The impropriety of what she contemplated gave her pause, but curiosity overrode her hesitation. Using a letter opener, she managed to work the simple lock open after several attempts. Inside lay a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it with trembling fingers, Evangeline recognized Edmund's handwriting, though younger, less controlled. The journal of a boy becoming a man. Conscience warred with curiosity as she held the private thoughts of her husband. To read them felt like a betrayal. Yet how else would she ever truly know the man she had married? After a moment's inner struggle, she began to read, promising herself she would only look for information about Frederick. The journal entries began when Edmund was 16, detailing ordinary concerns of a young aristocrat, studies, hunting, social engagements. Frederick appeared frequently, clearly adored by his older brother, despite the typical tensions between siblings. The Radcliffe parents emerged as distant figures, particularly their father, the previous duke, described as exacting and impossible to please. Then came an entry that made Evangeline's blood run cold. April 15th, 1827. Father insists I accompany him to survey the new section of the mine. Frederick begged to come along. He has been fascinated by the operations since Father first showed us the plans. Mother intervened on his behalf, despite Father's initial refusals. Sometimes I believe Frederick could charm the very birds from the trees. We leave at first light tomorrow. The next entry was dated nearly a week later, the handwriting erratic, blotched in places as if tears had fallen on the page. April 21st, 1827. They are saying I could not have saved him, that no one could have reached him in time. The physician claims I would have perished as well had I managed to go back into the collapsed tunnel. cold comfort as I hear mothers weeping through the walls. Father speaks to no one, locks himself in his study with Brandy as his only companion. Frederick is gone. My brother is gone. And with him, any light that existed in this cursed house. Evangeline's own tears fell as she read the raw grief of the boy Edmund had been. Several pages had been torn out after this entry, as if the pain they contained was too great to preserve. When the journal resumed, months had passed, and the voice had changed, harder, more controlled, reminiscent of the man she now knew. November 3rd, 1827. Father's drinking worsens. The mine remains closed after the accident, though the workers suffer for lack of income. When I suggested reopening with improved safety measures, he flew into a rage unlike anything I have witnessed. "That cursed place has taken enough from this family," he shouted. Perhaps he is right. Yet I cannot help but think Frederick would want us to make something good come from his loss. Mother barely leaves her rooms now. The physician provides laudanum to help her sleep, but I fear she takes too much. She looks through me when we speak, as if hoping to see Frederick instead. Subsequent entries chronicled the disintegration of the Radcliffe family, Edmund's father retreating into bitterness and alcoholism, his mother fading into laudanum-induced oblivion, and Edmund himself shouldering responsibilities far beyond his years as the estate began to falter. The final entry came after a long gap, June 17th, 1830. "Father is dead. Found in his study this morning, the empty decanter beside him. The physician claims his heart simply gave out, but I know better. He died of grief and guilt long ago. His body has merely caught up at last." Mother shows no reaction to the news. I doubt she fully comprehends it. At 19, I am now the Duke of Somerset, master of an estate in decline and a family in ruins. I made a vow at Frederick's graveside that I would restore what was lost, that his death would not be meaningless. Now the burden falls entirely to me. I will not fail him again. This shall be my last entry in this journal. Sentiment and self-pity are luxuries I can no longer afford. From this day forward, I must be the Duke in all things. Evangeline closed the journal, her heart aching for the boy who had lost so much, and the man who had locked his grief away so completely that it had calcified into the hard shell Edmund now presented to the world. The story explained so much: his isolation, his formality, the forbidden south wing which likely housed the entrance to the mines that had claimed his brother's life. Yet it did not explain why Edmund had chosen her as his duchess after so many years alone. She carefully returned the journal to its drawer, unable to bring herself to read more of his private pain. As she rose from the desk, her gaze fell upon a small painting partially hidden on a high shelf, a watercolor of a young woman with copper hair similar to her own, her smile gentle and eyes kind. Before Evangeline could examine it more closely, a voice spoke from the doorway. Her name was Charlotte Blackwood. Evangeline whirled around to find Mrs. Winters watching her, the housekeeper's expression unreadable as always. I was just, Evangeline began, guilt flooding her cheeks with color. Mrs. Winters stepped into the room, her gaze moving from Evangeline to the painting and back again. You resemble her somewhat. I suspected that might be why the Duke chose you when I first saw your portrait. My portrait? What portrait? The one he commissioned from the artist who sketched you at Lady Harrington's ball 2 seasons ago. Mrs. Winters spoke as if this were common knowledge. The Duke saw you there and was affected by the resemblance. Evangeline felt dizzy with this new information. Who was she to him? Mrs. Winters hesitated before answering. They were to be married, before the accident that took Master Frederick. She was visiting Somerset Hall that day, waiting for them to return from the mine. A shadow crossed the housekeeper's face. When word came of the collapse, she insisted on going to the site. Her horse was spooked by the commotion. She was thrown and broke her neck instantly. Horror washed over Evangeline. So Edmund lost both his brother and his fiancée on the same day? And effectively his parents soon after, Mrs. Winters confirmed. He was barely more than a boy, suddenly bearing the weight of a dukedom and insurmountable grief. That's why he never married, Evangeline whispered. Until now. Until me. A terrible thought struck her. Am I merely a replacement? A ghost made flesh? Something softened in Mrs. Winters's usually stern countenance. I have served Somerset Hall for 40 years, Your Grace. I watched the Duke grow from a carefree boy to a burdened young man, to the master he is today. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he sometimes looks at you when he believes himself unobserved. Evangeline's heart quickened. What do you mean? The Duke chose you because you reminded him of someone he once loved, yes. But in these weeks, I believe he has begun to see you for yourself. Mrs. Winters straightened, reverting to her professional demeanor. It is not my place to say more. I simply thought you should understand something of the man you have married. When Edmund returned from London 3 days later, Evangeline saw him with new eyes. She noticed the weariness he tried to conceal, the weight of responsibilities he carried alone, the moments when he seemed lost in thought, perhaps in memories of a past he could not change. At dinner that evening, instead of the polite distance she usually maintained, Evangeline engaged him in genuine conversation. "How was your journey to London?" she asked, truly interested. Edmund looked surprised at her sincere interest. Productive, if somewhat tedious, the solicitors required signatures on several documents regarding the Eastern properties. "The mining properties?" Evangeline ventured carefully. His eyes sharpened. "You've been making inquiries during my absence." "I've been trying to understand Somerset Hall," she replied, holding his gaze. "And its master." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Edmund set down his fork with deliberate care. "What exactly have you discovered, Evangeline?" She took a deep breath. "I know about Frederick and about Charlotte Blackwood." Edmund's face drained of color. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. For a moment, Evangeline feared she had made a terrible mistake in confronting him so directly. "Who told you about Charlotte?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Mrs. Winters mentioned her when I saw the painting in the library." Edmund closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the raw pain visible there made Evangeline's heart constrict. "So now you know why the Duke of Somerset is feared and avoided," he said bitterly. "The cursed lord whose family and fiancée perished under mysterious circumstances. The man who emerged from tragedy cold and heartless." "That's not what I see," Evangeline said softly. Edmund's expression turned skeptical. "No? What do you see then?" "I see a man who lost everything he loved when he was scarcely more than a boy, who shouldered responsibilities that would have crushed most men, who survived." "Surviving is not living," he replied, so quietly she almost didn't hear. Evangeline gathered her courage. "Then perhaps it's time to start living again." Their eyes met across the table, a genuine connection forming perhaps for the first time since their marriage. Something shifted in Edmund's gaze, a softening that made him appear younger, more vulnerable. The moment was broken by the arrival of a footman with the next course. Edmund withdrew behind his usual mask of formality, but not completely. Throughout the remainder of dinner, Evangeline caught him watching her with an expression that mingled curiosity with something warmer. As they prepared to part for the evening, Edmund hesitated. Would you care to join me in the library tomorrow? There is a collection of first editions I think might interest you." The invitation, though tentatively offered, represented the first voluntary extension of companionship from her husband. Evangeline smiled, her heart lifting. "I would like that very much." Edmund nodded, something like satisfaction flickering across his features. "Good night, Evangeline." "Good night, Edmund." The following weeks brought a gradual but unmistakable thawing in their relationship. The library sessions became a daily ritual, sometimes spent reading in companionable silence, sometimes in conversation that grew increasingly personal as Edmund slowly, painfully, allowed his guard to lower. He showed her his favorite volumes, revealing a mind far more poetic and philosophical than his austere exterior suggested. She shared her own interests, music, botany, the watercolors she had dabbled in before her marriage. When he discovered her talent at the pianoforte, Edmund had the instrument in the music room tuned for the first time in years. Charlotte played, he explained simply, when Evangeline asked about the sheet music she found tucked away in a cabinet. "I haven't been able to bear hearing music in this house since then. Would you like me to play something else?" Evangeline offered, setting aside the yellowed pages. Edmund considered this, then shook his head. "No. Perhaps it's time those pieces were heard again, if you would not mind." So she played Charlotte's music, watching as Edmund closed his eyes, his expression a complex mixture of pain and something like peace. When she finished, the silence between them felt sacred rather than strained. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "She would have liked you, I think." The words were both painful and precious to Evangeline, an acknowledgement that he saw her as herself, not merely as Charlotte's shadow. As April approached, the anniversary of the tragedy that had shaped Edmund's life, Evangeline noticed him withdrawing again, spending longer hours in his study, his nighttime wanderings of the halls becoming more frequent. Twice she heard him cry out in the night from his separate bedchamber, but when she rushed to check on him, he was closed off again, insisting it was merely a bad dream. The tension culminated on the eve of the anniversary itself. Edmund did not appear for dinner, and when Evangeline inquired, Mrs. Winters informed her that his Grace had gone riding and not yet returned, despite the gathering storm clouds. "He always rides on this day," the housekeeper said, worry evident beneath her composed exterior. "Usually he returns before nightfall." As darkness fell and rain began to lash against the windows, Evangeline's concern grew to alarm. When midnight passed with still no sign of Edmund, she could wait no longer. She ordered lanterns prepared and the stable hands to ready horses for a search party. "Your Grace, I must advise against you joining the search," Simmons protested, as Evangeline donned a riding cloak. "The weather is treacherous, and the paths near the old mine shaft are unstable even in daylight." "The old mine shaft," Evangeline repeated. "Is that where he would go?" The butler and Mrs. Winters exchanged glances. "It is possible," Mrs. Winters admitted reluctantly. "He visits the site each year, though usually in daylight." "Then that is where I shall look first," Evangeline decided, pulling on gloves. "You may accompany me or not as you choose, but I will not sit idle while my husband is missing." The conviction in her voice must have swayed them, for moments later she was mounted on a sturdy mare, Mrs. Winters, providing directions to the old mine entrance on the southeastern edge of the estate. 2 grooms accompanied her, though their expressions suggested they would rather face any punishment than venture near the abandoned mine on this of all nights. The journey was harrowing. Rain pelted them mercilessly, turning the paths to mud that threatened to unseat them with each step. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, terrifying flashes, followed by thunder that made the horses skittish. They found Edmund's horse first, sheltered beneath an outcropping of rock, reins loosely secured to a stunted tree. Of Edmund himself, there was no sign. "The entrance is just ahead, Your Grace," one of the grooms shouted over the storm. "But no one has been inside for years. It's not safe." "Wait here with the horses," Evangeline commanded, dismounting. "If we have not returned in half an hour, ride back for help." Lantern held high, she approached the mine entrance, a dark moor in the hillside, partially collapsed and overgrown with vegetation. The area surrounding it had been cleared recently, footprints in the mud confirming Edmund had been there. "Edmund!" she called, her voice swallowed by the storm. "Edmund, are you here?" For a moment, there was no response. Then, faintly, from within the darkness, "Evangeline?" Heart racing, she moved toward the sound, careful of loose rocks and unstable ground. The tunnel entrance was partially blocked by fallen timbers, but a narrow path remained navigable. Holding her breath, Evangeline squeezed through the opening. The air inside was damp and heavy with the scent of earth and decay. Her lantern cast eerie shadows on walls that wept moisture. Following the tunnel cautiously, she called Edmund's name again. "Here." His voice came from around a bend in the passage. She found him seated on a fallen beam, head in his hands, soaked to the skin and seemingly unaware of or indifferent to his physical discomfort. He looked up as her light fell upon him, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something like shame. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, rising unsteadily to his feet. "It isn't safe." "I could say the same to you," Evangeline replied, relief making her voice sharper than intended. "The entire household has been worried sick." Edmund ran a hand through his wet hair, looking momentarily lost, so unlike his usual composed self that Evangeline's heart twisted. "I lost track of time. I often do here." She approached him slowly, as one might a wounded animal. "Edmund, please come back to the house. Whatever ghosts you're facing, you don't need to face them alone. Not anymore." He stared at her, the lantern light revealing tracks on his cheeks that might have been rain or tears. "You don't understand. This is where it happened, where I failed him." "Failed who, Frederick?" Edmund nodded, his gaze shifting to the collapsed section of tunnel behind him. "He was just ahead of me when the supports gave way. I heard him call my name just once before the rocks fell. I tried to reach him, but Father pulled me back, said it was too dangerous, that we'd lose both sons. His voice broke. He was right, of course, but in my dreams I still hear Frederick calling. Evangeline moved closer, close enough to touch him, though she didn't yet. It wasn't your fault, Edmund. You were a boy. There was nothing you could have done. I was his older brother. I was supposed to protect him. And your father was supposed to ensure the mine was safe, Evangeline countered gently. The burden of that day doesn't rest solely on your shoulders. Edmund's eyes met hers, vulnerability naked in his gaze. When I received word about Charlotte, I thought God was punishing me, taking everything I loved because I had failed in my duty. No, Evangeline said firmly, finally reaching out to take his cold hand in hers. It was a terrible tragedy, a series of terrible tragedies, but not punishment, not your fault. Something broke in Edmund then. His shoulders slumped, and he leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. I have lived with this guilt for 20 years, he whispered. I don't know how to let it go. Perhaps not all at once, Evangeline murmured, but a little each day, and not alone. A rumble shook the tunnel, reminding them of their precarious location. Edmund straightened, suddenly alert. We need to leave, now. Taking her hand, he led her quickly toward the entrance, his protective instincts evidently overriding his personal anguish. They had nearly reached the opening when a louder crash sounded behind them, followed by the groaning of stressed timber. Run! Edmund shouted, pushing Evangeline ahead of him as dust and small rocks began to fall around them. They burst into the storm-lashed night moments before the tunnel entrance collapsed completely, the ancient mine giving up its final breath in a cloud of dust and debris. The waiting grooms rushed forward, helping them to a safer distance as the ground continued to shift and settle. When the danger had passed, Evangeline found herself still clutching Edmund's hand, both of them drenched and mud-splattered, but unharmed. He stared at the now sealed mine entrance with an expression of stunned disbelief. It's gone, he said hoarsely, after all these years. Evangeline squeezed his hand. Perhaps it's time to let the past rest. Edmund turned to her, his eyes searching her face with wonder, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You came for me. Into the dark. Into danger. Of course I did, she replied simply. You're my husband. Something shifted in his expression, the last of his carefully constructed walls crumbling away. With gentle reverence he raised a hand to her cheek. Evangeline Radcliffe, he said softly, her married name sounding like a prayer on his lips. What have I done to deserve you? Before she could answer, he lowered his head and kissed her, not the formal brush of lips from their wedding day, but a kiss of genuine emotion, of gratitude and awakening tenderness, and something that might, with time, grow into love. When they finally parted, Edmund pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the cold air. Let's go home, he whispered. As they rode back to Somerset Hall together, the storm gradually subsiding around them, Evangeline realized that for the first time since her arrival, she truly was going home, not to an imposing mansion filled with shadows, but to a place where understanding had taken root and healing had begun, and beside her rode not the fearsome Duke of Somerset, but Edmund, a man with wounds and regrets like any other, but also with capacity for kindness and perhaps for love. Spring gave way to summer, bringing transformation to both Somerset Hall and its inhabitants. The estate seemed to breathe more freely, as if the collapse of the mine entrance had indeed allowed old ghosts to rest at last. Edmund ordered the south wing renovations accelerated, turning what had been a neglected reminder of tragedy into bright, airy spaces filled with light. Most significant, however, was the change in Edmund himself. The formidable facade remained when dealing with tenants or business associates. The Duke of Somerset would always command respect. But in private, with Evangeline, a different man emerged. The stern lines of his face softened when he smiled, which he did with increasing frequency. His laugh, when she first heard it, startled them both with its rusty disuse, but soon became a sound she treasured. Their evenings were now spent together by choice rather than obligation. Sometimes they read aloud to each other in the library. Sometimes Evangeline played the pianoforte, while Edmund listened with closed eyes. And sometimes they simply talked about books, about the estate, about their childhoods, their hopes. Edmund began showing Evangeline the business of running Somerset, explaining estate accounts and management decisions, valuing her perspective in a way that made her feel truly partnered rather than merely decorative. "You have a good mind for figures," he remarked one afternoon as they reviewed the quarterly accounts together. "Better than mine, in truth." "My father never bothered to teach me such things," she replied, pleased by the compliment. "He assumed I would marry someone who would handle all financial matters." Edmund's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "And instead, you married me, who insists on boring you with ledgers and crop rotations." "I find it fascinating, not boring," Evangeline corrected him. "This is our home, our responsibility. I want to understand it." The word "our" hung between them, weighted with meaning. Edmund reached across the desk to cover her hand with his. "I never expected to share these burdens," he said quietly. "I had grown accustomed to carrying them alone." "You don't have to anymore," Evangeline promised. That night, for the first time, Edmund came to her chamber not merely to bid her good night, but to stay. Their coming together was tender, hesitant at first as they learned each other, then growing in passion as trust deepened between them. Afterward, as Evangeline lay in the circle of her husband's arms, she marveled at how far they had come from that first fearful night. "What are you thinking?" Edmund murmured against her hair. Evangeline smiled in the darkness. "I was remembering our wedding night, when you asked if I was afraid of you." His arms tightened slightly around her. "I saw such terror in your eyes. It wounded me, though I had no right to feel wounded when I had given you every reason to fear." "Not you," Evangeline corrected gently. "Your reputation, the rumors. But the man who asked that question, who gave me choice when he could have demanded his rights, I think I began to fall in love with him in that moment, though I didn't recognize it then." Edmund went very still. "Love?" he echoed, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. Evangeline's heart raced as she realized what she had admitted. They had never spoken of love, not directly. Affection, yes. Partnership, certainly. But this deeper sentiment had remained unvoiced until now. "Yes," she said softly, gathering her courage. "I love you, Edmund. Not because you remind me of anyone else or because you're the Duke of Somerset, but because you're you, stubborn and honorable and kind beneath all that formidable armor." Edmund shifted, propping himself up to look down at her face in the moonlight that filtered through the curtains. His expression was one of wonder and disbelief. "I never thought to hear those words again," he whispered. "Never thought to feel worthy of them." "You are," Evangeline insisted, reaching up to touch his face. "So worthy." Edmund turned his head to press a kiss into her palm. "When I first saw you at that ball 2 seasons ago, something about you called to me. Yes, there was a resemblance to Charlotte. I won't deny that drew my eye initially. But it was your spirit that held my attention. The way you laughed with genuine delight at your companion's jest. The kindness you showed to an elderly dowager whom others had abandoned in favor of more exciting company." He paused, tracing the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "I watched you refuse 3 dancing partners without appearing unkind, then accept the 4th, a shy young man others had overlooked. I saw intelligence in your eyes when you discussed poetry with the ambassador's wife, while other young ladies spoke only of ribbons and gossip." "You noticed all that?" Evangeline asked, amazed. Edmund nodded. "I noticed everything about you, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I found myself thinking of a future that wasn't merely duty and obligation. It terrified me." "So you arranged our marriage without meeting me properly?" Evangeline prompted, curious rather than accusatory. "I convinced myself it was for the best, that a formal arrangement would protect us both from complications." A rueful smile crossed his lips. "In truth, I was a coward. I feared your rejection if you knew the man behind the title, the broken man so many whispered about." "Not broken," Evangeline corrected, lifting herself to kiss him softly. "Just wounded. And healing now, I think." "Because of you," Edmund murmured against her lips. "My brave, beautiful Duchess, who faced down her fears and mine." He drew back slightly, his expression suddenly serious. "I love you, Evangeline. I should have told you weeks ago, but the words felt presumptuous somehow, as if I had no right to them after bringing you here under such circumstances." "Say them again," Evangeline requested, joy blooming in her chest. I love you, Edmund repeated, his voice stronger. With all that I am, all that I have been, and all that I might become with you beside me. They sealed this declaration with a kiss that promised a future neither had dared to imagine when they first met at the altar. A future built on understanding, respect, and love freely given rather than coerced or assumed. Autumn came to Somerset, painting the estate in russets and golds. The harvest was bountiful, the tenants prosperous under Edmund's increasingly fair and forward-thinking management. Improvements Evangeline had suggested, a school for tenants' children, a clinic staffed by a physician who visited weekly, were being implemented with enthusiasm. Somerset Hall itself had undergone a metamorphosis. Rooms long closed were opened and refreshed. The grounds were maintained with care rather than obsession. Laughter could often be heard echoing through corridors that had known only hushed whispers for decades. The staff, too, had thawed considerably toward their new Duchess, particularly after witnessing the change in their master. Mrs. Winters actually smiled on occasion, and even Simmons had been known to unbend enough to share stories of Edmund's boyhood pranks with Evangeline when his master was not present. It was on a crisp October morning when the final piece of healing fell into place. Evangeline had been feeling unwell for several days. Nothing serious, just fatigue and a curious sensitivity to certain scents. When she mentioned it to Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper's knowing look sent a thrill of possibility through her. The local physician confirmed her suspicions during his weekly visit to the estate clinic. Evangeline was with child, Edmund's child, due to arrive in the early spring. She waited until that evening to share the news, after they had dined and retired to the library for their customary quiet time together. Edmund was reading correspondence by the fire, while Evangeline ostensibly worked on embroidery, though her thoughts were far from the delicate stitches. "Edmund," she began, setting aside her needlework, "I visited Dr. Harrison today." Her husband looked up immediately, concern crossing his features. "Are you unwell? You've seemed tired lately." "Not unwell, no." Evangeline smiled, nervousness and excitement warring within her. Quite the opposite, in fact. "Dr. Harrison confirms that we are to have a child in the spring." Edmund went perfectly still, the letter in his hand forgotten. "A child," he repeated, as if the words were in a foreign tongue he was struggling to translate. Evangeline nodded, suddenly uncertain of his reaction. "Are you pleased?" For a moment, Edmund didn't move. Then the letter fell from his fingers as he crossed the room in 2 long strides, kneeling before her chair to take her hands in his. "Pleased," he echoed, his voice rough with emotion. "Evangeline, you have given me back my life, my heart, my ability to look forward rather than backward. And now you offer the greatest gift imaginable." His hands moved to frame her face with exquisite tenderness. "Yes, I am pleased. I am humbled. I am terrified and exhilarated in equal measure." Relief washed through Evangeline. "I was afraid you might worry, given everything." Understanding dawned in Edmund's eyes. "You thought I might fear history repeating itself." She nodded. "My love," Edmund said solemnly, "the tragedies of the past have shaped us, but they need not define our future. This child will be born into a home filled with love, not the cold duty I knew growing up, nor the fear that greeted you when you first arrived." He placed a gentle hand over her still flat stomach. "This child will know their father as a man who makes mistakes, but strives to be better, who values kindness over power, honesty over pretense, who loves their mother with his entire being." Tears sprang to Evangeline's eyes at the beauty of this vision, and they will know their mother as a woman who believes in second chances, who sees the truth beneath facades, who never stopped hoping for happiness, even when it seemed impossible. Edmund rose, drawing Evangeline to her feet and into his embrace. "We will build this future together," he promised, "day by day, choice by choice." The winter months passed in quiet contentment as Evangeline's condition became increasingly evident. Edmund proved to be an attentive, if sometimes overly protective, husband. He insisted on moving their bedchambers to the ground floor to spare Evangeline the stairs, commissioned a special carriage with extra padding for her rare journeys to the village, and even learned to make her favorite tea when morning sickness plagued her early weeks. Their evenings remained devoted to each other, though now often included planning for the child's arrival. Edmund surprised Evangeline by revealing a hidden talent for woodworking, spending hours in the estate workshop, crafting a cradle of exquisite design. "My grandfather taught me," he explained when she marveled at his skill. "He believed a duke should know how to work with his hands as well as his mind." The south wing, once forbidden and shrouded in painful memories, was transformed into a cheerful nursery suite. Walls that had witnessed tragedy now gleamed with fresh paint, in soft, welcoming colors. Windows that had been shuttered for decades now stood open to sunlight and fresh air. "It feels right," Edmund said, as they stood together in the completed nursery one evening. "To bring new life to this part of the house, to reclaim it from the shadows." Evangeline leaned against him, his arms solid and secure around her expanding waistline. "Frederick would approve, I think." "Yes," Edmund agreed softly. "And Charlotte, too." It was the first time he had spoken Charlotte's name without pain shadowing his features. Another healing, another step forward. With late winter came unexpected news from London. Edmund's distant cousin, Lord Richard Caldwell, had died suddenly, leaving his young daughter Eleanor orphaned. As her nearest relative, Edmund was named guardian in the will. "She's only 6, Edmund told Evangeline after receiving the solicitor's letter. "I've never even met her." "Then she must come to Somerset," Evangeline said without hesitation. "No child should be alone in their grief." Edmund's face softened with love and gratitude. "You would welcome her? Now, with the baby coming so soon?" "Of course. She's family, Edmund." 2 weeks later, a small, solemn-faced girl with enormous brown eyes arrived at Somerset Hall, clutching a worn doll and regarding her new guardians with wary uncertainty. Evangeline's heart went out to her immediately, recognizing in Eleanor's reserved demeanor the same defensive wall that Edmund had built around his own heart. To everyone's surprise, it was Edmund who broke through the child's reserve first. Kneeling despite his dignified position to address her at eye level, he spoke to her not with condescension, but with simple honesty. "I know what it is to lose those you love, Eleanor," he told her. "Somerset Hall was a cold place when I was a boy. But it isn't anymore. And while we can never replace your father, we would like to offer you a home here if you'll have us." Eleanor studied him carefully with the unnerving directness of childhood. "Can I have a pony?" she asked finally. Edmund's startled laugh, genuine and warm, echoed through the entrance hall. "Yes, I believe that could be arranged." The addition of Eleanor to their household brought unexpected joy in the final weeks before the baby's arrival. Her presence seemed to complete something in Edmund, allowing him to revisit aspects of childhood through her eyes, this time with warmth and affection rather than the cold duty he had known. Watching him teach Eleanor to ride her promised pony, hearing their laughter drift up from the gardens, Evangeline felt her heart might burst with happiness she had never dared to imagine when she first arrived at Somerset Hall as a frightened bride. The following spring, as wildflowers bloomed across the Somerset estate and birds returned to build nests in the awakening trees, Evangeline gave birth to twins, a boy with his father's raven hair and a girl with her mother's copper tresses. Edmund, who had paced anxiously throughout the labor, was overcome with emotion when the midwife placed his children in his arms. "Frederick and Charlotte," he suggested tentatively, looking to Evangeline for approval. She smiled tiredly from the bed, understanding the healing symbolism of these names. "Frederick and Charlotte," she agreed, "to honor the past while embracing our future." Edmund placed the infants gently beside their mother, then sat on the edge of the bed, taking Evangeline's hand. "When you first came to Somerset Hall, you asked if I feared that particular obligation of marriage," he reminded her, his voice thick with emotion. "Now I must ask you, are you afraid?" Evangeline looked from her husband to their newborn children and back again, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "No," she answered truthfully, "not of anything, as long as we face it together." Edmund leaned down to kiss her forehead, then each child's. "Together," he echoed. "Always." Years passed, and the once fearsome Duke of Somerset became known throughout the county, not for his forbidding demeanor, but for his fairness, his progressive estate management, and his evident devotion to his family. Somerset Hall, once whispered about as a place of shadows and secrets, became a center of community, hosting harvest festivals for the tenants and opening its gardens to visitors on summer weekends. Eleanor grew into a confident young woman with her guardian's intelligence and determination, but blessed with an easy laugh that brought joy to all who knew her. She adored her younger cousins, as she called the twins, appointing herself their protector and playmate with solemn responsibility. In time, Edmund formally adopted Eleanor as his daughter, not by obligation but by choice and affection. From that moment on, Eleanor became more than a ward. She became family in every sense. Frederick and Charlotte flourished under the watchful care of parents who had learned through their own journey the value of honesty, trust, and second chances. Edmund proved to be a far different father than the one he had known, present, affectionate, willing to set aside ducal dignity to crawl on the floor with his children or tell bedtime stories with theatrical voices that delighted his audience. On the twins' 5th birthday, as the family gathered on the south lawn for a celebration that included tenants' children and village families alike, Evangeline found herself watching Edmund. He was kneeling between Frederick and Charlotte, helping them feed carrots to a gentle pony, while Eleanor supervised with exaggerated importance. His head was thrown back in laughter at something one of the children had said, the sound carrying across the lawn, free, unguarded, joyful. How different from the stern, enigmatic Duke who had awaited her at the altar. How miraculous the transformation, from feared lord to beloved husband and father. Mrs. Winters appeared at Evangeline's side, her once severe face now softened by the contentment of seeing Somerset Hall restored to life. "You've done well, Your Grace," the housekeeper said, following Evangeline's gaze to Edmund and the children. "We've done well together," Evangeline corrected gently. "All of us." That evening, after the celebrations had ended and the children were asleep, Edmund found Evangeline in their private sitting room, gazing out at the starlit gardens. "Happy?" he asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Beyond measure," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "And you?" "I never knew such happiness was possible," Edmund admitted. "When you first came to Somerset Hall, I was a man half alive, dwelling in shadows, afraid to hope for more than duty and obligation." He turned her gently to face him. "You changed everything, Evangeline. With your courage, your compassion, your willingness to see beyond my walls." "We changed each other," she corrected, reaching up to trace the lines of his face, no longer severe but softened by years of smiles. "That's what love does, I think. It transforms us, not into different people but into better versions of ourselves." Edmund smiled, the expression now natural and frequent, where once it had been rare. "Do you remember the question I asked you on our wedding night? 'Are you afraid?'" Evangeline quoted softly. "And now I ask you again," Edmund said, his blue eyes holding hers. "After all these years, after all we've built together, are you afraid?" Evangeline rose on tiptoe to press her lips to his, pouring into the kiss all the love and gratitude and joy of their shared journey. "Not of anything," she whispered against his mouth. "Not with you beside me." In the nursery above, their children slept peacefully, untroubled by the ghosts that had once haunted Somerset Hall. In the gardens below, spring flowers bloomed where once shadows had dominated. And in their embrace, a duke once feared for his cruelty and a young woman once terrified of her fate found the answer to the question that had started their journey. "Are you afraid?" "Not anymore." The end. Dear listener, sometimes life places us in grand, echoing halls of uncertainty, where shadows of the past seem louder than the promises of the future. Perhaps you, like Evangeline, have known fear. Perhaps you, like Edmund, have carried silent grief for years no one could see. But tonight, let this story remind you, healing is always possible, even after decades of silence. Love can find us not in youth's haste, but in maturity's depth, and the most profound connections often come not when we are perfect, but when we are honest. Your worth has never been measured by your age or your past. It is found in the courage to keep loving, to keep hoping, and to keep opening the door, even when the world outside feels cold. So rest tonight knowing this: you are cherished. And just like Somerset Hall bloomed again, so can your heart in every season. With warmth, light, and deep gratitude. Legends of the Fall Team, thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. We hope this story brought you comfort, warmth, and a spark of hope. If it touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share with someone who needs a reminder that love, healing, and transformation are always possible, even in the most unexpected places. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for supporting our channel so we can continue bringing you more stories filled with love, redemption, and beautiful twists of fate. Don't forget, at the end of this video, another emotional story will appear. Click it and get swept away again.